Are we live?
Oh, well, there was a pause moment there where I wasn't sure, but it does look like we're live. George, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, and I can see you over there. Look, I got my pointing finger right.
Good, good. We're that way. We've got it right to start with. Welcome, everyone. This is episode 7 of the Data Mix. Almost a month since our last episode, actually, where we had Sam Caruana here on episode 6. And it's been a while. George and I have had our travails. We were supposed to be together in Edinburgh, but we have been scuppered by weather, illness, various other things that have been happening. So it's still a delight to see you, mate. How are you doing?
I have been better. Let's don't get the violins out, but I am stranded in a grueling project that's seeing long hours. So this is a welcome bit of relief. I'm really looking forward to this session. Bring a little bit of colour to some of the stuff that I'm doing just now.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's again, we seem to be going in polar swings of direction on each episode at the moment, but this one I think is going to be a cracker, and it's really exciting to introduce our guest for episode 7. Actually, so I'm just going to bring her on. Our guest for episode 7 is Nadieh Bremer, and it's delightful to have you here. Where are you in the world at the moment today, Nadieh?
Hi, thanks for having me. I am still in a tiny town outside of Amsterdam for the coming week.
Well, okay. That's we know you have plans in the near future as well. But it's amazing to have you here. Thank you for agreeing to be on the show. And for those of us who know maybe my past a little bit more than George's, but he still can't remember if he was involved or not. And we tried to work it out if we were all involved at the same time the last time that we met. But we actually had Nadieh there for Click Dev Group almost 4 or 5 years ago now.
I was at one of them because remember we used to do Scotland and London.
I think we lost your camera, Nadieh. You might.
I'm trying to tech myself in the meantime. I don't know why it just usually stops working. Like it doesn't work at all.
No worries. We know that you're there. We'll carry on anyway. So we have Nadieh, and Nadieh actually attended 2 Click Dev Group events for us way back when. I think we tried to work out, and it was like 2017. I think, Nadieh, right? That was pretty much where it was at the time. So she presented twice for us, and it was interesting because it was on the cusp of things changing in your life. And we'd love to talk a little bit about that as well. But obviously, we have people in the chat and LinkedIn. I'm going to go and confirm that we are actually streaming on LinkedIn in a minute or two as well. Hopefully that is all happening. But again, it's fantastic to have Nadieh here as well. And I wonder if it's maybe a good time, Nadieh, just to hand it over to you, just to introduce just a wee bit about yourself, and then we can dig into things a little bit about some of the reasons that we thought it would be really interesting to have you here today, actually.
Sure, yes. So I'm Nadieh. I've always lived in the Netherlands, except for a short stint in the US during college. But I graduated as an astronomer 10 years ago, and then knew I didn't want to continue in academia. I love doing the research in the topic of astronomy, but I hated writing the papers. So instead, I became a data scientist working for Deloitte Consulting, still working with data, lots of data and exploring data, but just the topics changed from stars to people, mostly what people buy, what they do. And was happily doing that for a few years. And then around 2015, I kind of realized that kind of lost my passion for another predictive model, but instead found out that it was actually data visualization that was where my passion was, to be able to have the hard math and data side and finding insights, but also combining that with the creative part and making things. And so I had a short stint at Adyen as a data visualization designer for their client dashboards, but I realized through a personal project that I did together with Shirley Wu called Data Sketches that I loved making the sort of the more one-off creative data visualizations the most, where I could really just make it custom for that specific data set. So in 2017, I took the jump and I became a freelancer under the name of Visual Cinnamon, and been happily freelancing ever since working on my visuals, and actually moving more and more towards data art over the past few years.
Awesome.
I think that's a key one, and we're going to move on to that a bit later on. I think your data art perspective and NFT, and for those of us who need a little bit of education in that area, we're hoping you can provide. We still hope you can get your camera sorted, Nadieh. You're still
working on it as I'm talking. Yes.
Blank at the moment, but we are going to carry on anyway. So I thought we'd just tee one up for you to begin with. So obviously you talked a little bit about your career, and you started off as studying astronomy. So how on earth did you get from astronomy into data viz in the first part of your career?
So at astronomy, I think it's one of the more of the romantic of the hard sciences. I mean, with all the gorgeous Hubble images and that you see, that was really one of the reasons why I was interested in astronomy in the first place. Just this amazingness that nature can create. I still think that nature is the best artist for me. That there is the detail and the amazingness. So I was already doing data visualizations for the research that I was doing with astronomy, but I just wasn't really realizing it at the time. But I was definitely doing data investigations that you do with data science in general, but it was about the Millennium Simulation, which is a simulation at that time about the way sort of the universe formed from the Big Bang until today, where you can see how structure forms. And like I said, I love that, but the papers and the idea of academia and having to move around and finding tenures, that just wasn't quite my vibe for the next thing. Also, the fact that the more that you start to specialize, the fewer people that understand what you're actually doing. So I wanted something a little bit more tangible than that, and that's how I ended up with consulting and becoming a data scientist, because it was. In essence, I like almost every data set as long as it has a story to tell, and then the topic. I can get excited about almost any topic as long as there's a story. So I didn't eventually never minded having to go out of astronomy. Although if I have to pick, I'll pick the astronomy data set over any other data set. But I still enjoy the other ones. But throughout that, I kind of missed the creative part after a few years. Whereas with we were working on a lot of slide decks. Being consultants, we were hired by a lot of clients, and so we had to create a PowerPoint deck about every week to show them what we found from the data. And so lots of sort of visuals in there. And I noticed that I was spending like my late hours, my own time, on trying to perfect these data visualizations in the decks and learning everything about the ggplot, but also about the chart functions within a PowerPoint. So it took me, after 4 years, it was obvious, like I should really try and do data visualization. that's where I'll be most happy. Oh, why is my camera just not working?
That's all right. We can live with the camera issues. Don't worry, it's cool. The most important part is that you're, and I think that journey it's so cliched, but it's super important just because of the way that you've progressed through your career as well. George, I don't know if you wanted to chip in here at the beginning.
Well, I was going to claim solidarity with you, Nadieh, on the creating visualizations in PowerPoint, working for and I think there are only so many ways you can do it. But do you know what? The impact of the visuals is the first thing that a client will see. So it's important, and then they will. I think within 2 or 3 seconds, they will very quickly start making some assumptions based on the visualizations you've given them. I always think that the person that's actually building the visualization has the most power. And probably this is where ethics and things come into it. But it did. I think in our rehearsal yesterday, Nadieh, I kind of cheekily asked if it's possible to make a profit and loss account on a PowerPoint deck look sexy in any way. And I was expecting you to say, "Get out of here!" No. Hey,
we can see you.
Sorry.
This is awesome.
Yes, sorry about that.
Good job.
But yeah, you thought it was possible. You thought it was possible to make it make a profit and loss, even a profit and loss, look good for an accountant.
Yes, I I think there is, but I would definitely like for every piece of every chart that I create, I would have to sort of sit and think about it. For example, I made several visualizations for Adyen, the company that I used to work with, for their shareholder report. So there are a few with which were always visualized in a very dry way, I would say, in very standard charts. And I turned them into Sankey diagrams and tree maps in a certain way that were really well received by the audience. So it's to me, it usually is how the more data points that you have, the more visually interesting you can make the chart. Like there's the bigger the data set, the higher the potential for you to make it into something more specifically for that data set and more visually captivating and more colorful if you want to.
And what about interactivity? Do they have to be interactive? I presume when you were doing your PowerPoints, they were all static.
Yes, my opinion is that interactivity is definitely not a must, but in some cases it can really help. But I would say that is more about the interactivity where you can see really changes in the data set. Like you can say that the data set shows a flow throughout time or a different kind of something changing, and not the kind of interactivity where it's a tooltip or a drill down, or those kinds of things to me have depends on the tool. Like some tools make it really easy to have a tooltip, but the things that I work in with D3JS on the web, that's just a lot of work that isn't worth that time usually. So it really depends on the case. If you want to make a chart that somebody looks at every day and more of a dashboard KPI kind of thing, I think interactivity is usually overdone just because it's possible. Whereas I think with more of the news articles, the web-based articles that have really like a story to tell from A to Z, I think then in those cases interactivity and especially animation in the data set can really make a difference.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking about that actually, and you were talking about data moving over time, what instantly came to mind was the Gapminder animations. I think the Gapminder Foundation with Hans Rosling, wasn't it?
Yes.
In there, yes, because these, I mean, you can instantly then just so much information comes across in something like that. So yeah, the time dimension always adds
Yes.
element. Yeah.
Definitely, but I think with that one, especially with Hans Rosling, it is like 50%, maybe even more, maybe 75% of that was him talking and guiding you throughout what you want to see. Like that visualization,
Really?
even with the spheres, it could have been done like a line for each of the countries. So even in one overview, you could have seen that general flow of everything moving upward. But it was really just because he was there and he was guiding you that kind of animation really, really worked well.
Yeah,
I would say.
I think that's a really interesting segue because on episode 1, actually, we had Steve Wexler, who's a bit of a Tableau legend and can do lots of interesting things with Tableau. But we constantly have this battle, right, of what is interactivity for the sake of it, especially when it comes to day-to-day data visualization when we're talking dashboards, right? Because building a dashboard is very different from building a bespoke storyline that runs through a data set and maybe even captures a point in time as well. So I think I think that must have been a very interesting journey to have moved from a sort of regular data viz background to a more specific, almost like data journalism. I've seen a lot of courses out there, and looked at a lot of the work by Alberto Cairo and people, authors like that as well that have been really influential in that area. So in terms of that data journalism side of things, did you just find that it sort of started to creep into your portfolio, or was it a specific choice, or was there one client that made you decide that's what I'm going to go for, or how did all that sort of happen for you overnight?
I think so. While I was working on data sketches, and data sketches was this collaboration, 12 topics with where both Shirley and me created sort of a more elaborate creative data visualization for it. And for one of those, Google actually, so Alberto Cairo was working together with Simon Rogers from Google News Lab, asking data visualizers to create stories with their data. And they asked if one of the months could be a sort of collaboration with them. So then we had to sort of, go all out and make it much bigger. So that was really the first more journalistic data story that I created about what people translate on Google Translate. And basically by having that, I think, in my portfolio, and afterwards having done this one time, I actually did another one or two of the data sketches projects more as sort of long form stories instead of just one visual. And then when I started freelancing, so the Google project led me to go freelance because I didn't want to say no to Google as a first client. And it was still it's definitely a mix of more dashboard related things, not necessarily dashboard with multiple things, but maybe one specific chart for that client based on their data set, or they wanted some form of interactivity that just wasn't possible with the dashboarding tools at the time. But I think through having those like two things in my portfolio, eventually Scientific American found me and The Guardian found me, and I made stories for them. And then throughout the Scientific American, I worked with them more often, and then I got stories also with other newspapers, the New York Times, Physics Today. There is a it's kind of this sort of slow domino that came, and it was more, I think, myself realizing that those were the things I loved working on even more than the custom made sort of charts with high interactivity for more kind of dashboard things. That I was lucky to also be in a position to say no more often to the business related visuals and say yes to any kind of journalism or magazine kind of related visual that came by. And that's how that kind of shifted.
I think that's sorry, George, I saw you just starting there, but there's one more thing from my side. I think that's awesome the way that shift has happened then, because I think to be honest, I think it's a lot of people's dream, right, to be able to freelance properly and to be not just like freelance because you have to, but to have the choice to freelance over doing, like George was talking about his P&Ls earlier on. Most of us who have that ambition have to do a bit of balancing for a while to make that happen. So that must have opened up a whole new world for you to be able to sort of choose your work. And I guess that maybe allowed you to step into the area of NFT and generative art and all of that side of things without as much on your shoulders, I guess. So
definitely, yes, because I also had sort of the luck that I stopped working for the first half of that year to do Fab Academy, which we can also go into if we want. But so when I in July of 2021, when I came back to I'm open again for client work, I noticed this thing going on my Twitters that some of the artists that I follow, generative artists, were doing NFTs, and so I thought, oh, that's interesting. What is that? And I looked into that. I thought it was fascinating, this idea of a digital sort of signature, a way to sell digital art. So I jumped in there, and I didn't have anything I didn't have client assignments. I didn't have a boss. I could just throw all of my time on this and see where it would lead. That's definitely one of the benefits of being able to freelance in a way.
Yeah. Well, actually, Nadieh, that brings me into a question that I've been dying to ask for a few minutes. Have you seen over the years that you've been doing this, then, a definite sort of change in fashion or change in trend as to what people are looking for from their data? Viz, I mean, if you go back 10 years ago, I was generally happy with a pie chart or a standard bar chart. But now that just doesn't cut it.
Yeah. No, but that is a trend. It is the trend has been that on the one hand, companies are more open to more exotic visuals, that they're okay if it doesn't have a name, if it's not a line chart or a bar chart or a scatter plot, but it's something unique, and they're much more open to that. And on the other hand, that's almost also what they are expecting. They come to you and say, we have this report, and last year we did this, and this year we want something else than what everybody else is doing. And sometimes there is a possibility, but sometimes it's just that you have a tiny data set with only 5 numbers. There's really not much I can do with 5 numbers, unless you get a graphic artist to turn it into something, but not for me. So it really is, clients definitely know that that there is more possible than what the tools can give you sometimes, like the standard examples of the tools. I know people can do magic with Tableau and these kinds of things it's all about, but going above and beyond the default examples is what companies want these days, in those cases where they need to present to an audience, like externally in a way.
That's fascinating.
I think that's right on. And when you talk about the volume of data points and the usage of that data as well, right? The other thing is, do you want to tell a story about like day-to-day financial data? Usually not, but some of the topics that you get pulled into, there really are stories to tell, and the companies that you work with, they know that there are stories in that data, right? They just don't know how to surface them. Or maybe they know how to surface them, but they don't know how to visualize them in an impactful way. So have you had any of those challenges in the past where you've sort of been said, we know there's stuff in this data and we know there's interesting stuff, but A, we don't know what it is, and B, we don't know how to visualize it. So how much of a remit do you get when you work with these? How much sort of control do you get to create the visualization of your choice? What's your how does that get decided?
Actually, I feel like I get a lot of freedom. So I definitely have clients. I've had projects in the past where it's really just indeed them going like, we have this data set. It's huge. We think there's something there. That's all we got for you. Just make it into something. I do need to know then sort of what is your goal? What are you trying to do with it? For example, one client, the goal was to create a giant data art piece to go in their lobby. Okay, so that gives me a direction. For another one, another company, that was actually an energy company. For a pharmaceutical company, they wanted to have something to show their internal employees the vast amounts of data that they have access to, but maybe weren't aware of, and then to kind of make something that was intriguing even to their internal employees. And another one was for a magazine, Physics Today, where there was the 30-year anniversary for Hubble Space Telescope came up, and they had found that you could have, there was an API from which you can request every observation that the Hubble has done, and they just felt like there must be something there, and here you do this. And then it was just about create something that is, find an interesting story to tell. And in all of these cases, it's really, I then have a very significant sort of data analysis side where I'm really diving into the data, trying to understand all the facets from it, trying to find different stories. And usually there are different stories. And then I discuss it with the client and tell them, like, we could go this way, go with that story. What about this one? And like maybe some very rough ideas of how I visualize it. And then it's basically we decide on which of these stories to go for. And I start making it, but because I actually like those a lot, because the client has almost zero expectations. They don't have an idea in their heads about how something should look. So it's much easier to get them on board, because everything you present them is something that they weren't really thinking about. And every insight that you're showing them often is also something that they actually didn't realize was in the data set. So it's those are the good projects.
Well, that's pretty cool, and I want to at this point just bring in a couple of questions from our audience on LinkedIn at the moment. We've got one from Jenny here who wants to ask, and I think this is quite tightly tied in with what you talked about there in terms of the toolkits that you use from a specific data art perspective. You mentioned scary things like ggplot and things like that earlier, but what are the toolkits that you sort of work with, or have you just honed yourself in terms of being able to use R and MATLAB and all of these types of things? How does that sort of that digging part work for you?
So I have three things, mostly maybe four-ish, depends on what you count or not count. But I generally start my data preparation in R, data analysis in R. I might use Python, but usually only because something cannot be done in R. Maybe an API exists for Python, but not for R. I'll grab it out with Python, put it into a CSV, and continue with it in R. Those kinds of steps. I'm very open when it comes to gathering my data. I've used so many other tools, so usually all of them open source though, to just gather data, scraping the web, APIs, just even manual stuff, but then always getting it into R and analyzing it. And then I will create sketches, which can be as simple as just a notebook with a pen, but I have an iPad Pro with a pencil, so it's easier to sort of, with layering, but I'm still drawing. I don't want it pixel perfect. And then after I know which design I want to go for, I have Visual Studio Code together with either Firefox or Chrome to actually build my visualization. So I build all of my visualizations with JavaScript and using D3.js, which is very common on the web to visualize data with, but also very vanilla. So I don't have other things such as what is it these days, React and Vue and all these things. I'm just very vanilla. And afterwards, if it's a static piece, I will continue with it in Affinity Designer. Sometimes Adobe Illustrator because the client needs it as an AI file or something. But I personally like Affinity Designer. That one is actually, I think, the only one that I've named right now that isn't free, but it's very affordable. And that's basically my entire toolkit in terms of what I use. If I also look at the bar, like the things underneath my screen, it's Firefox, Chrome, R, Visual Studio Code, Affinity Designer, or the terminal, and GitHub Desktop.
Pinned to your taskbar, right? The stuff that's
my
pinned to your
taskbar. That's it. Oh,
that
Spotify. I guess I don't know if that counts. Spotify's there too.
Okay. Cool. So, and it's interesting that you do that even for visualizations that turn out to be static. So from a data point of view, I guess they're accurate as well. There's no estimating. Your visualizations are data perfect. And then, awesome.
Yeah. I always use, for me, it's really purely the data that I work with. Those are my brushes in a way. I don't make graphical elements. It's really everything that you see on the page is either a data point or some sort of textual label or like a line between data points. It's all pure data.
No, I think that's a really great point, and I'm definitely going to come back to the sketches part, not right now, but we're going to come back to the sketches part. We've got another couple of things that have come in on LinkedIn, so I just wanted to pop these up for us to have a look at as well, if you don't mind, Nadieh. So we've got Vlad here, and he's talking about audience distinction, right? So again, it's this comparison of where are your bog standard pie charts and your bar charts, and where is the line, right? Where do you find the line of being more adventurous and needing to actually tell a story on a very specific set of points? So thanks for that question, Vlad.
Audience is definitely one of the key elements to knowing how to make a design for a data visualization. For me, it is about if you want to make something like a dashboard or something where a manager needs to look at once every day, multiple times a day, or pretty often, then it is usually what is most important is that you get the key insight across as quickly as possible. So there's not a lot of bells and whistles. It's also usually very focused. It's very focused on that one specific question that needs to be answering. Like it could be how is the sales doing? Or I mean, that can be pretty broad. But anyway, it's usually very focused. Whereas with other visuals, it can be you can show much more of the data set. You can show the layer underneath all of the averages and the means and the aggregations. And you can have tiny other stories to look into it, and you can show context around the main insight that you want to convey, and that becomes more important when your audience will only see it, for example, one time. So something in a magazine or for marketing purposes, because then you also because they will only see it one time, and you need to grab them because you haven't convinced them that this visualization is worth looking at. So it needs to look beautiful as well to be able to pull them in and make people want to give the effort to actually understand it. And so many people have seen line charts and bar charts, so it's not something you can easily make people interested in anymore. So you have to come up with a different way. And then you shouldn't be doing it in a bad way. But I would say with data visualization, there are good ways and bad ways to visualize data, but there's not a best way to visualize data. That all depends on taste and the audience and the person itself. Something that can be perfect for one person is okay-ish only for the other person. So that'll always be a gray area. But yeah, it's thinking about your audience definitely makes a difference. And there is definitely this level of how creative you can be or how on point your visualization could be.
Oh,
Yeah.
this might be a daft question, right? But how much of a difference does it make if you're building a static visualization and it's on a web page to if it's on a magazine page, right? Because you talked about there when someone buys a magazine, right? They flick through the pages, and if I know what I'm like, I flick through the pages until I see something interesting. So, are there different capture points that you have to think about if it's like paper media or physical media versus if you're like building a web page?
Yes, although the most part of that is really just a technical aspect because making something work on the web and then you have to think about desktop screens, mobile screens, how fast it loads, browser bugs. So that's a lot of technical heaviness on that side versus static where you know how it's going to look. And you can be much more creative because you know how it's going to look. There's never going to be anything else. But I think actually, if it's in a magazine, you could put more stuff in a smaller space. Sort of the you can increase the resolution of what you're showing in a smaller space if it's for a magazine. If it's going to be printed, then on a website, like it's we can only people seem to be overwhelmed more easily when they look at something on a website versus if they look at something in a magazine or a newspaper. So that's mostly it, I would say. That
Yeah,
difference.
yeah. George,
Yeah.
did you have something else here before I don't know how much lag we've got, so I'm always keen to make sure.
I was just, it's quite interesting. So most of the visualizations I've done have been for, I guess, business users. So you'll build something once and it'll be used hundreds of times. It might be used, it'd be a daily report or, a sales figure or something that they're pulling off. And so this idea of making a visualization that's going to be seen once, used once, it's an interesting concept to wrap your head around. So you can put a lot of effort into that. It depends how wide the publication is. If it was sort of one of our local newspapers here, it might just be seen by just a few hundred people. But if it's something like the Guardian, then I can see there being a big appeal. For something like a publication, how much time would you put into it, or is it sort of how big is a piece of string? Is there a general length of time that goes into creating one of these visualizations that has a wide appeal?
It is a very, very different. So I've made so the Guardian piece actually, and the second one I did for Google News Lab, they were in the 200 plus hours because they were just so elaborate. An entire website, multiple visualizations, worked on mobile and desktop, had animations, all the good stuff. And the idea that was really to that people would stay on that page for several minutes and that it would be shared worldwide with their audiences, whereas for a one-page spread in the Scientific American, that could range somewhere between 10 hours for an idea that I know is like this is the way it should go. It's not super complex, but it's perfect for this, to maybe 30 hours where I'm sort of struggling myself, or the way to visualize it is more complex than so it can be within that range. And then I think generally for projects in general, I'm more in the 40 to 60 range when it's more like a poster for a marketing related something for a company. Yeah.
And does it depend a little bit on your creativity, your mood? You did say that nature is quite an inspiration for you.
Yeah.
Does that mean you'll go for a walk, and then you'll come back and you'll have an Einstein moment, and then to create an amazing visualization?
I wish there was like a certain way that it would work, but I found that I have like multiple avenues, and one of them might work, and others don't work in that case. So going outside or just stopping and doing something different for a while, actually going to bed on time and then trying again in the morning is a great one. Um, I also have just working on something else, another part of the visual, and then that can sort of give you a better view of how the parts that you're not certain about how they should go. I've had that happen a few times. But generally, I get a lot of inspiration by looking at what other people have visualized because
Yeah.
I shouldn't invent the wheel every time I make a visual. Other people have great ideas too, and then I see something that's like, oh, that's a great way that would fit my specific data set perfectly in this case. But of course, I'm not going to copycat it, but I can get inspiration from a certain way that they visualized it, and then I will incorporate it. But I also have like 80% of my time, I feel, is an endless iterative round where I'm not certain how it goes, but I just try stuff and I try stuff and it goes in the right direction, or maybe sometimes a tangent kind of moves backwards in a wrong way, and again, and I go back to where I still liked it, and I keep going forward. So it's a very winding road in trying to find the design, because there's so much more from the moment that you visualize your data in a way that it's presenting the data in a right way and actually making it look good. That part is very great for me. I never know how, when I'm at that first part, like, okay, so the data is on the screen now, to how is it going to look beautiful. That's a very frustrating and very rewarding part. That is, every time I start on that, I'm like, I hope I can figure it out this time again, because I right now I just don't know if I can.
Do you know what's interesting? I'm pretty sure I've seen some of your like like outtakes of visualizations that you've tried to build and then they've not quite gone right to start with. And the
Yep.
other thing as well is that you mentioned, taking inspiration off other people, and we've talked about the sketches earlier. So I think this would be a really good time to ask you about, obviously, about data sketches and your time with Shirley, because some of those iterative processes must have come through at the
Yeah.
time, right? And if I can, you can keep talking, and if I can, I'm going to just try and bring the cover up on the screen here to let everyone
Yes.
see the cover. But tell us a bit about data sketches and how you met Shirley, how that, oh, you've got it there. Oh, I don't need it then.
It's a really big book, by the way. It's like heavy.
There we go.
Yeah.
That is a big book. That's much better than me bringing a PNG onto the screen. So, so how did you meet Shirley, and how did that whole collaboration start then?
So I met Shirley in a Slack. That was kind of like a small group of people that were enjoying DataVis back in 2015-ish, 14, 15, I don't even, yeah, 15. And then we met at OpenVisConf, which was a great DataVis conference that ran at the time, where we really hit it off, and we already knew each other on the Slack. So afterwards we kept on chatting, and then somewhere around June, the Data Visualization is Beautiful Awards opened up again. The new sort of, you could send in an entry, and Shirley and I both, we were thinking about that. It's like, have you seen this? It's like, what are you going to send in? And I remember that it was sort of I don't think I have anything to send in this year, and we were both that way because we've been busy with other things like preparing for that talk in at OpenVisConf and whatnot, and we were both sort of saddened by that fact. And then Shirley said, well, why don't we do a collaboration where we force ourselves to make like a full data visualization from start to finish? And that became data sketches in a way that where we forced ourselves to make 12 in the sense that the collaboration was that we were both doing our own thing. We started from the same ideas, like, this month should be about movies, the next month should be about the Olympics, and so on. But then we were completely free. But the collaboration was the fact that we were, in super close contact in terms of talking about every aspect of that way, ideas, finding the data, weird things, sending designs across, and really just, giving very honest feedback on how to continue. And that turned into the book, because we wrote about the entire creation process from that initial idea to actually making the final thing, including all of those horrible in-between bugs and where it's not going right and you feel like this is just, train wreck going to happen, but eventually you find your way through some twisting road to a final project.
I remember the Twitter exchange as well, Nadieh, that you and Shirley used to have, like, sort of public Twitter exchanges about how your ideas were going and when you were stuck, because you ran each visualization to completion, right? You did each sketch to completion, and before you started on the next one, because as I recall, you were on a month-to-month timeline
Yes.
together. How was that in terms of accountability? Did you ever have times where you were sort of phoning each other and it's like, I'm not sure if I can do it this month, mate, I'm struggling, or was it all just like, did it just happen?
No, definitely not. It was, although we intended this to be a year-long project, I actually took 2 years, and Shirley took about 3 or 4 years even to finish completely. So we started out really well. I was able to finish 10 months in 10 topics in 10 months, but that was also because it was just, I could really combine it very well with my work, and I just started freelancing, so I had time on my hands through that as well. and Shirley was freelancing from the very start. And then so she gathered more clients, and it became more difficult to combine. But the other problem was that it's a very sort of psychological thing where if you made something, the next one has to be better, the next one has to be better. So if you do that 12 times, at some point you're going to run into a wall. And that happened to both of us, like a bit of a creative block where we didn't know what we wanted to do. So for Shirley, that happened a little bit sooner. So she took it a little bit slower for her final 4-ish projects. And I took it slower for the final 2 projects. But eventually, we're very happy that instead of trying to force ourselves to do it within these 12 months that we set for ourselves, that we did it until we felt it was right. So, but yeah, 12 months we didn't reach at all.
And how much of that was like outside of was that all completely outside of your day jobs as well? Were you doing this all?
Yes.
See, that folks and listeners is dedication for you to build 12 bespoke visualizations in the space of a year on the side. That is how you become good at what you do. And I think there's a very practical lesson there. I think a lot of people have tuned in today, Nadieh, and at last count, I think I was looking at about 40 or 50 on the stream, which is brilliant. I think a lot of people are interested in that journey and how did you start here and ended up here as well. And one of the questions that we had in the chat here is from Joe, and again, this helps to put us into sort of another area of what you've been doing. So, is data art dependent on the data being static? And I think this is going to transition us a little bit into NFT, which is dynamically static, if you like, as we go. But how much of that is a factor when you're building visualizations? How much of it this is a snapshot in time compared to this is something I have to understand over a series of time, I feel like.
I think not all data art needs to be static, but I think it is easier if it's static. And that has to do with if you don't know how the data is going to look, you cannot necessarily be as creative, because you might say, I'm going to do it like this, and then it looks like some sort of droplet shape and it looks beautiful. But if the data in the next batch looks totally different, then you lose a very important part of that data art piece. So it's just easier to do data art if it is static. But that doesn't mean that it all has to be static. I, for example, created an algorithm that visualizes the transactions that happen in the blockchain. So won't go into what the blockchain is, but just know it consists of blocks, and each block consists of transactions generally. Let's say it's that. And then I created an algorithm that can visualize each separate block. So each block contains different number of transactions, and different kinds of transactions, different amounts happening with the transactions. But my algorithm can visualize each of them as its own unique thing, and that's become a data art piece where I don't know exactly what data I'm going to get. However, the reason why it works is because I can get a sense of where the data, like I know that it's not going to go super crazy in a way, and I've made the algorithm in such a way that for example, I'm not dependent on exactly how everything is positioned. So if a new data set with different transactions looks completely different, it works with the design that I've made for it. So you have to be much more conscious if you make a data art piece that has changing data, or about how you are going to tackle it. So that's it's kind of the depends, and not all data sets would lend themselves to being updated. For other data sets, you really need sort of something that won't work well if it might change. But yeah, I've made mostly pieces that are static though, because I know that feels the safest, and then I can just be sure that I'm like, this is the final thing and I'm happy with it. It gets my stamp, and then I can feel like, okay, so now this is what I've created.
George, I'll let you step in here.
Yeah. So, how much are you? So, if we're talking about the NFTs, then are these generally commissions, or are you just getting creative and you're creating art, data art for art's sake, and then selling them to the highest bidder? What's the thought process there? How does that work?
It's actually all been, I'm making stuff and then just kind of putting it out there. I do have so I have some, like they say, one-on-ones. I've sort of crafted it very specifically. There might be a tiny collection of just one, or maybe 3 or 4 from that specific algorithm. You need to find a platform to sell it, but if you basically found that platform, such as Foundation or Super Rare or Maker's Place, are some names, then it is sort of selling to the highest bidder. In a sense, you can get into an auction. It runs for 24 hours, and at the end, who has the highest price, they get it. But the other things that I've been mostly doing over the last few months has been long form collections, where you actually create one out of 1,000. So the idea is that, well, maybe not 1,000, but it could be 300, 500, 700. But you create an algorithm, and then you need to make it so well. And this is the hard part, because usually with making data art and generative art, you will create an algorithm. You will output 100 different versions of that algorithm, and then you will curate just the perfect ones, like the 2 or 3 that are perfect. Whereas with the long form collections that I've been making, everyone has to be nice and good, and that takes like a month or 2, or for some people months, to make something that they are happy with, where every output looks good. And that's kind of what I've been working on recently, and for these you need to have a connection with the platform usually. So I've done things for art blocks, for gen.art, and for ethblock .art, and also a collection for UNICEF, and then you need to make this connection with the platform, and they need to agree to host you in a way. So there's a level of curation going on with those platforms that it's like a two-sided process. You want to work with them, but they also want to work with you. So you need to convince them of your qualities in a way.
Okay, that's interesting. So these the Longhorn ones, then, does that mean you can sell this multiple times? Each person gets a slice?
No, it's so I've been trying it. So it's kind of like every person gets a ticket to draw from the algorithm, and the algorithm will create an entirely different output for each time it's been called. So there are many sort of random processes going in between. So there could be, you could see it as everybody gets a random number, and then in between that I have tens to hundreds of places where I say, if the number is smaller than 0.1, do this. If it's bigger than 0.1, do that. And if I have sort of so many of these different roads, so you can see it as one of these old things where you have all the pegs, and then you put a coin in at the top, and it just kind of bounces its way down, and every time you put a coin in at the top, it bounces differently. That's kind of what happens here. So at the bottom, there is like an infinite number of possibilities in how the output will look. So they will all have something similar. It's the same style, but they will all be unique, and that is the idea of a 1 out of 1,000. Like the collection is several hundred, but everyone is a 1 out of 1. It's unique, and only that person has that particular one.
That's cool. I got to ask, did you have you sold your visualization of the blockchain as an NFT? I think there's something inherently geeky about that.
Oh yeah, no, I made that one. So this is a very interesting platform called ethblock art, where their concept is that you make an algorithm that gets a data set from a block, and you need to do something with that block. So that's really just baked into it. And the fun thing is that with many platforms, it's more like a coin machine. You put in a coin and you get the result out, and only when you open it, you kind of see what you got. But with this one, you get to look at every block if you want. I mean, there are millions. I wouldn't suggest going through all of them. And then you can say, this one I like. And then you can actually adjust a few things. This one I like, so I'll buy this one. So that algorithm that I created about Ethereum blocks, that was an algorithm. So it's again a few, like 300 of those visuals will be created or have been created in that sense.
And then, do people display them on their wall in their?
That was my question. Has there been actual physical exhibitions of digitally generated art? Is that what this is? I mean, this is what's going to happen, Nadieh? Is this the future of generative art?
Yeah, well, lots of things are happening right now. So there are people that are actually getting prints of their NFTs, their artworks, really just on a giclée print, really big, or just moderate size on their wall. They could either do it themselves, do the printing process, but also for my most recent collection, I had created several prints that I signed and then sent to the different collectors. There are people that are buying digital screens on the walls. I believe Samsung has some really nice screens that are squarish and that you can show your NFTs on. And there are companies currently making these kind of NFT canvases where you only need to connect your wallet and then you have an app and then you can say, well, right now I want to see that NFT because that one is in my wallet. And there are people that love creating online galleries, kind of like metaverse galleries, where they enjoy really sort of putting their NFTs in a digital space, putting them together, seeing what they curate. And then there are people that just kind of, have it like in their wallet, and sometimes they scroll through it and just get happy from the fact that they can see that they've collected their art, or just enjoy being able to support that artist. I mean, I know there's a giant area of NFT that is less cozy, but I feel like the generative art side is still, for me, feels like a nice and cozy place within the NFT environment where it's about people. There is even like there are flippers around it that try to make money. There's a nice core part of collectors and artists that just where it revolves around the art.
Well, do you know what? When we were promoting this on Twitter, the whole irony of this, Nadieh, is that I was retweeted and told that I had to email a specific account so that they could promote you and the show because it had NFT. And I just thought the irony of it was incredible. I have to pay you to generate something that isn't random to talk about of somebody that is doing this work. I just thought it was so weird, I think is the way that I would describe it. But look, there's one more place I'd like to go before we finish off, and I mentioned it at the start of the call, and you mentioned that you took 6 months out in between this whole data sketches phase and then coming through to the generative art. You talked about the Fab Academy, right? And so I had the time to go and have a look at just for a few minutes at the Fab Academy, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what that meant for you and the type of things that you got out of that.
Yes. So the Fab Academy, Fab stands for fabrication, not fabulous, although it was a fabulous experience. But it's a place where you learn how to work with machines such as laser cutters, 3D printers, CNC machines. You learn how to create your own PCBs and electronics, like really drawing your own schemes and soldering your own components and wiring it all up. And it was like a year and a half ago. I already knew that I wanted to move more towards data art, but it was very hard to sell those kinds of projects to clients. Even if I was already doing creative kinds of visuals, they generally still, there was, the clear story to tell. Whereas pure data art, where it's more about how the visual is conveyed to the audience, and you don't necessarily need a legend because that's not the goal of what you're trying to do. That was very hard, and I was kind of struggling with that. And maybe I thought, well, maybe if I make more physical things, that would lend itself more towards artful data. Maybe I should try and do that. But I didn't know how to do any of that. I'm very purely digital. And then, so on the one hand, Shirley had already had been an artist in residence at ITP at New York University, which is a master study that combines art and technology. So I was already aware of this kind of thing about laser cutters and how you could combine that with art. And then I found out about the Fab Academy in September of 2020. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be great if I could take off, just no data for 6 months during the start of 2021. And I just kind of focus on this entirely new thing and I will learn skills that hopefully, but maybe not, but I would be okay with that. But hopefully I would be able to put into use to maybe make some physical data art afterwards. And I was just so excited about that prospect of all these new things that I could be learning and how I could be creating with that, that I took that jump, even though it was pretty scary because you don't have income for 6 months, but also it's, that was, to me, that was worth it for the experience and the joy that I thought it would give me. And this idea that I felt a little bit stuck at that time. So I did that for January to June. Every month you had to learn something new and you design something on the computer. That was basically always the idea. So you make something on the computer and then you let a machine make it for you, with utter perfection, because a machine can laser cut so super nicely, and a 3D printer can make small things so perfectly. And that was really, really just, I haven't worked harder. I mean, I worked harder during those weeks than I did during my work. Just, entire weeks went by. My partner had to do grocery shopping by himself because I didn't have the time. But it was so much fun to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And were these in-person things, Nadieh, or were these all virtual? They were in person?
Yeah, so you can do the Fab Academy. It's actually a worldwide sort of, it's 20 weeks, a little bit over 20 weeks. And you can do them, so it's run by MIT, by Neil Gershenfeld, but there are Fab Labs, so basically maker labs all around the world, like hundreds of them. And several of those Fab Labs offer the Fab Academy. So what happens is there is sort of a general course on Wednesday, where you're just blasted by all of this new information. And on Thursday, you go into the lab, and there's like a local instructor that teaches you the machines and explains how, kind of makes all of that information from the day before more tangible. And then you have the next sort of 6 days to make your weekly project in the lab. Although because of COVID, we had to do sort of one day in the lab, one day not in the lab, because so that the number of people in the lab would be like smaller. But eventually, halfway through, we got the self-testing, so we could all be in the lab again every day we wanted. That was great.
Yeah, I think that's very cool to have done like physical work on that as well. Yeah. And what an excellent way to do the transition between topics as well. I'm sure that the physical element of it made a huge difference to actually going back to doing it digitally again, because you must have a new way of thinking about things after you've done it, right? It's one thing drawing a bowl, but it's another thing going to a potter's barn and actually making a bowl for yourself, right? I can't build data art physically, but that's the closest comparison I can come to.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've only got a couple of minutes left. George, did you have any sort of closing points you wanted to make? It's unbelievable. It's just flown past, but we like to give our viewers their time back as well. So, George, I'll pass it over to you for sort of any closing queries and comments you want to make.
Yeah, well, I just kind of want to sum up by this has given me a lot of food for thought. The fact that I think data is not dead. Data is very much, everybody's talking about it. But certainly in the world that I'm working in, it's all black and white. It's pretty dry. And sure, it's important. It allows companies to make decisions on their strategy, etc. But I think this is giving me food for thought. I don't think I'm quite ready to go freelance, but the fact that they're you can look at a bit of data a different way, and there are no right and wrong answers, is quite powerful. So yeah, and I love that you took 6 months out to do the Fab Academy. That's
that was very, very cool, and we can't let the episode go out without giving a pointer back to obviously Nadieh's own work. We were hoping to be able to see a little bit of that during the show, but we'll post the link into the chat on LinkedIn as well. It's been incredible to have you here, Nadieh, and there's so many areas that we didn't get into as well. So potentially this could be a repeat process in a little bit of time as well, because it's been wonderful to have you here. So visualcinnamon.com is where you can find Nadieh's portfolio and get in touch with her if you want to hire her for anything, which we would obviously recommend as well. And I think from our side as well, we just, George and I really appreciate everyone who attends the Data Mix on a week-to-week basis. And just a little bit of a reminder from us, because we don't think we do enough job of telling you. We have a YouTube channel where we have all of our previous episodes recorded, and you can go and watch it at your leisure as well. And if you don't have time to go onto YouTube, you can download our podcasts, and they're all available on Apple, Spotify, and all that side of things as well. It's not an NFT, but at least it's something you can use on the go, right?
It could be.
It could be. You never know. Maybe that's another conversation for us to have outside of that as well. You never know. But look, it's been fantastic, and we're rolling up on the hour now. So just once again, want to thank Nadieh for for giving her time and coming and telling us about her journey. I'm sure you'll find it's been absorbing. George, I don't know about you, but the snow has just started heavy right here, like coming down now. So
Nope, it's fading away quickly here. Send some over. I couldn't get my
I
slides
will. I will. We don't have episode 8 quite in the books yet, just because our guest, I think, had a fairly late change of dates and availability. So we'll pivot to that and let you all know via LinkedIn. George, anything to close off with?
Just thank you so much, Nadieh. You've been a pleasure. You've brought colour to the day, and certainly food for thought. And yeah, look forward to connecting up again in the near future. And good luck for your next move.
Right. Yes. So I'm moving to Norway for 6 months. Another adventure.
Just sneak that in at the end,
Leave it
right?
at that.
Moving to Norway for 6 months. It'll be
There was
fine.
so much more we could have talked about.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun. Just felt so very informal and fun to talking to you both. Thank you for having me.
It's been great, and sorry to anyone on LinkedIn that we didn't get to. As you can tell, we've had a busy hour, so we'll try and visit back after the show. But it just remains to say thank you very much. Have a wonderful Thursday, everyone. Don't get snowed in. Stay safe, and we'll see you for episode 8 very soon. See you soon, guys. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.